Investor Intelligence provides general information only. You should consider seeking independent advice to see how this information relates to your unique circumstances. Please refer to the terms and conditions available at investorintelligence.com.au for more.
Guys, welcome to this week's episode of Investor Intelligence, brought to you by the team at the Property Mentors. It's your weekly podcast for all things investment, and it's hosted by me, Phoebe Sikowski-Wallace. Now, although this may be the podcast for all things investment, we're doing something just a little bit different today, but I promise it still somewhat ties into investing. But I want to introduce my guest first, who I'm thrilled to have here today. So Dr. Josie Vine is a senior journalism scholar from RMIT University. Dr. Josie, welcome to Investor Intelligence.
Why, thank you, Phoebe. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you. So as I said, I'm super excited to have you as a guest, and given your background, some may be confused as to why I've invited a journalism scholar to talk today.
Sure.
But just before we get into that and to kind of paint a bit of a picture as to why you're here, can you tell me a little bit more about your sort of professional background and the journey of your career?
Sure. Well, I spent several years as a journalist in regional media, in which I did a bit of finance reporting, but I must say it's not my area of speciality in terms of journalism. I then went into academia and worked very, very hard, and now I research and I teach on what's called media logic. So it's the influences of the wider media systems on journalism and why journalism behaves the way it does. And I've been doing that, since about 2006, showing my age now, aren't I?
Well, okay. Well, I've definitely got the right guest to talk about this topic then today. Media logic sounds very on brand. But with that extensive career in journalism, the reason I've invited you here today is to talk about, the news cycle and how the media industry works.
Sure.
This episode was inspired by the fact that, media plays a large part in how people feel about many topics and events.
Sure.
In our case here at the Property Mentors, it's the property market. Mm-hmm. And, one of the terms we're hearing a lot is media hype. Mm-hmm. Of course, the media outlets have their own reasons for delivering news stories in certain ways and certain tones, which can produce all kinds of different feelings in people. Mm-hmm. Not to mention these days, there's even more sources. I say the term sources loosely and in air quotes, of news for people to consume. But journalism has had to evolve quite dramatically in recent times, especially, with the uptake of the internet. So over your career, what changes have you kind of seen to the industry?
Oh, transformed, Phoebe, absolutely transformed. The skill of journalism, back in my day, you would either be a newspaper journalist, a radio journalist, or a television journalist. Nowadays, you kind of have to be all three. You're not only writing, you're also getting images, moving and still, and you're also recording audio and putting all of that up online. So it's changed dramatically in terms of the skill. However, I must emphasise that journalism's basic reason for being has not changed. And as long as we are still living in this wonderful thing called a democracy, it will not change. Because it's inherently, journalism's function is inherently linked to democratic processes. And I'd kind of like to talk a little bit about, either now or a bit later, about what journalism actually is, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there about what journalism is.
Yeah, go for it now if you like.
Well, a lot of people conflate the media and journalism, and they even conflate the news media and journalism, which isn't quite correct. And the way I like to talk about it is using the metaphor of a big balloon. So imagine this big balloon, and we'll call that the media.
Okay.
And inside that big balloon, there are lots of little balloons. And one of those little balloons is called advertising. Another one's called soap opera. Another one's called, public relations. All these little balloons. And one of those little balloons is the news media. But I haven't got to journalism yet.
Mm.
All those balloons have a function, and that main function is to make money. Now, that's fine. I like making money. But imagine that little balloon called the news media, and inside that little balloon called the news media is journalism. Journalism's function is not to make money. That's the news media's function.
Okay.
Journalism's function is entirely different, and in a democratic society, and of course not all societies function like this, but in a democratic society it's to tell the legislators, i.e. the government, what the public's concerned about, what it's worried about, what needs to be done. And vice versa, it's to report back to the public on what those in power are doing, because in the end those in power are just our employees in a democratic society. So journalism is not the media, and neither is journalism the news media, although it's part of the news media.
Yeah.
It's different. It's rocking around in there like a little crazy atom.
That's such a fantastic way to look at it. I mean, I myself have never really taken the time to differentiate between journalism and media, but I can definitely see how they've become interchangeable terms.
And particularly with social media and with digitisation, it's all been pushed together, if you like. And so it's more difficult to see what is media with the aim of selling something, whether that's a product or an ideological stance or something to, belittle a government policy or a business policy or whatever. They all have self-interests. But journalism, and it's just this tiny little thing sitting inside a little balloon called the news media, journalism has a completely different reason for being, I guess. Now, that's not to say that it's not concerned with the news media making money. Of course it wants the news media to make money, otherwise they don't get paid. But their primary reason for existing is different. And with digitisation, it's very difficult to differentiate between, let's say, public relations and journalism.
Okay. Yeah.
Very difficult, or something. And indeed, public relations tries to pass itself off as journalism. That's the sign of success of a public relations campaign.
And speaking of sort of social media, how have concepts like clickbait and, social media made it harder to fight, misinformation and extremist reporting?
Oh, absolutely. Because all of a sudden, the digitisation of the media in one way is absolutely the basic democratic ideal. Everybody's got a voice. Everybody can say whatever they want, and there's no comeback. So in one way, that's our democratic ideal. But in another way, all of a sudden you've got voices saying whatever they want.
Yeah. With
no regulation, and the digital media can't be regulated. That's absolutely impossible. And so all of a sudden these voices that have no professional journalistic training or discipline look like journalism. Yeah. And so people kind of go, oh my God, the journalists are saying this. But the journalists aren't saying that. It's people who look like journalists. And I think there's a lovely quote from one of my favourite authors, Terry Pratchett, who wrote kind of science fiction novels. But in one of his books, he says, a lie can race around the world while the truth is still doing up its shoelaces. So, and this is the issue, that rumour and innuendo, particularly in social media, just zaps around the world, goes viral before anybody can blink or criticise it or think about it or check whether it's true. And, you know, as I said, the truth is still sitting there tying up its shoelaces.
Yeah.
So this is how it works with social media. In terms of clickbait, I mean, that's back to your old idea of we've got to sell stories that attract advertisers or attract eyeballs or attract ears, or in this instance, attract clicks. But it's not journalism doing that. It's the media.
Yeah.
It's other things like advertising, public relations, you know, all the other medias that are out there that need the clicks. Now, I'm not saying journalism doesn't need the clicks. I mean, somebody's got to be reading journalism, otherwise what's the point? But it's not the clicks that it's after. And I'm kind of hoping this conversation will go towards, you know, how do we tell what is journalism and what isn't?
Yeah, well, how do you? And just to add to that, how do you yourself ensure that you're getting the right information when you're reading or consuming the news?
Well, you got to find the ones that you trust. Me personally, like, I watch a lot of media. I follow a lot of stuff. I watch a lot of different journalism. But the ones that I trust would be the ones that are recognised within the journalism industry as quality. So, and I'm not making a plug here, I have no self-interest here, but people like Nick McKenzie from Fairfax Channel 9, he's the most highly awarded journalist in this country. I would believe anything he told me.
Right.
People like Chris Masters, another one of the highly awarded ones. He's from Channel 9 Fairfax as well, but he's got a background in ABC. People like Samantha Maiden, and she works for News Corp, but News Corp, you've got to understand, is the news media. So there are various journalists that you get to know and trust. In general, I think the ABC, and if we're talking about property reporting and finance reporting, in general, the ABC is normally pretty good. And I think, you know, get to know the work that journalists do and work out the ones you trust. Now, that's pretty tricky. Because how do you know who you can trust?
Well, you've obviously had a lot of experience in navigating that, but I know a lot of people wouldn't have taken it upon themselves to do that, and therefore it's kind of easier to take anything they read, but especially if it produces any kind of fear or passion in them, and run with it.
And once you're conflating journalism with the media or even the news media, then you do. You do. Why wouldn't you? And there's a whole industry within journalism called fact-checking and verification. That's the new big journalistic skill. And by the way, RMIT offers a wonderful micro-credential in fact-checking and verification. By the way, that's a plug. But
no, that's fantastic to know. We'd like to see more of that, so that plug is very welcome.
You look at the sources that they're using. Where have they got that source from? And if it's a source that's come from, I don't know, Twitter, or a source that's come from Facebook, don't listen to it.
Yeah.
But if it's a source that they have access to and it's an original source, i.e. they haven't pinched a quote from anywhere else, they've actually interviewed, then you can be pretty assured that that's a legitimate information that you're reading. It's come from a source. Ignore the headlines. Journalists don't write the headlines, believe it or not. Somebody entirely different writes the headlines. Journalists just write the copy.
Okay.
So, and also, you know, ignore the images as well. Journalists don't choose the images. They only choose the words.
Okay.
So it's that you've got to concentrate on. where the sources have come from. Are they anonymous sources? Don't read anything that's got an anonymous source, because 9 times out of 10, well, if it was coming from Nick McKenzie, I'd believe it.
Yeah.
Because he's such a well-known, respected journalist. But if it's coming from just, anybody, and they're using an anonymous source, I'd be really sus of it.
Yeah. Okay.
Really sus of it. Professional quality journalists in general do not use anonymous sources. And the reason for that is because if a judge demands you to reveal the name of your source in a court of law, and you're ethically obliged not to reveal that source, if the judge says, look, you've got to name your source, I think they're a witness to a crime, you are ethically obliged to say, I'm very sorry, Your Honour, but my professional ethics forbid me from revealing a source. That's contempt of court, 2 years in jail. So journalists will not risk using an anonymous source unless the story is worth 2 years in jail.
Wow.
And some stories are.
I'm sure there are
some stories are worth 2 years in jail, but not if the source is made up.
Yeah, okay. And we often hear, terms like news and current affairs, and there's shows like The Project and A Current Affair and Today Tonight who have vastly different stories to regular news programs such as the ABC, for example. Are there different rules that each format must follow?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, for a start, when you're watching news, you're watching stories that are packaged into 1 minute 30.
Yeah.
When you're watching current affairs, they're longer, so they got to fill them out. What are they going to fill them out with? That's the thing. And I'm not saying current affairs isn't credible at all. Current affairs, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you watch anything on Four Corners, I would give that a degree of credibility.
Sure, same.
But your commercial current affairs are they have a different set of professional values. I think that's what I mean. And it's about entertainment as much as it's about information, because information, particularly, I'm very sorry, I hope I don't offend you, but particularly information that's involving numbers, i.e. finance, is pretty boring.
Oh yeah, it can be very dry. Yeah.
So they've got to, and you can do it in 1 minute 30, but if you're doing it in 5 minutes, what are you going to do? You've got to dress it up to make it attractive.
Yeah,
for the eyeballs,
keep people watching or listening or reading or whatever it is. Yeah.
Yes. So there are different rules, and there's different rules between news and current affairs, and there's also different rules between, say, current affairs ABC style or SBS style and current affairs commercial current affairs style. So you've got to be kind of aware of that.
Yeah, and with the exception of organisations such as the ABC, media outlets are often for-profit organisations and make money from subscriptions and advertising. Are there ways in which you can sort of understand the motivations that a particular publication may have, or why they may hold the opinions that they do?
Yeah, it's curious, isn't it? Look, on a very superficial level, you can look at the ads and kind of think, well, how does this story benefit this advertiser? Okay, that you can do that. But then you get things. A couple of years ago, 2UE host John Laws was paid a heap of money by the Bankers Association, a very well-known case called the Cash for Comment case. And he kept that entirely quiet. And all of a sudden, his opinion about banks went from bank bashing to, oh, how wonderful banks are, how responsible they are, etc., etc. And some very, very clever person on Media Watch did a bit of digging, thought this is weird, did a bit of digging and delivered a brown paper envelope and all this kind of stuff. And turns out that John Laws was making a hell of a lot of money off the Bankers Association, not 2UE, the company, John Laws himself, to dress up this basically advertising / propaganda as credible journalism. And it was very hard to tell. It was only through the magnificent investigative skills of a very small Media Watch team that actually brought it to light. And it was huge. It was huge. 2UE was looking at losing its licence.
Okay.
But it didn't. Did John Laws get the sack? No, he didn't, because listeners like tuning into him. Did he get fined? I think he got fined something like $3,000. And when you're a multi-billionaire like John Laws, $3,000 isn't a lot. Actually, I think it was a bit more than that. But anyway,
he's still a billionaire, so whatever it was, it's probably not much.
It was small change for him.
Yeah.
So we're in this situation where, because we have this underlying principle of freedom of speech and freedom of the news media, we can't say who can be journalists and who can't be journalists. So you've got to be really careful and choose the credible journalists where you get your information from. Yeah,
it's that double-edged sword, isn't it? Like, these days everyone's able to have a say, which is great, but the downside is everyone's able to have a say. So.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
So on that, like, how important is it for people to be critical of the news they may be, reading or watching or consuming in general?
Oh, foundational, absolutely foundational to not only to getting accurate information, but foundational as in your role as a citizen who votes in elections and decides, where you're going to spend your money. I mean, you don't want to be going and spending money on a product that's, I don't know, abused animals or something like that. It's absolutely foundational to everything, every little choice we make throughout the day and the big choices we make in our lives. It's absolutely foundational that you question every bit of information that you're getting from journalism or otherwise and think to yourself, who benefits from this? Who doesn't benefit from this? Absolutely. And make sure the sources are credible. Make sure they're named sources, they're not anonymous sources. And there's a new trend in journalism at the moment called transparent journalism. And what journalists actually do is they hyperlink everything that they say, including if they've interviewed, let's say they've interviewed the head of the RBA, they hyperlink RBA and it takes the reader straight to the interview transcript. People can listen to the actual interview to make sure that what the journalist has said is fair, is accurate, there's no spin on it. Mind you, this all takes time, and I don't know about you, Phoebe, but I don't have that kind of time in my day.
No, I don't either, and I was going to say that I think a lot of people just will take whatever, and fair enough that not everyone has time to dig deeper and see if this is reliable, but, if you do have the time, you're saying that is an important thing to do.
It is, but you're also, in a way, relying on journalists to do that work for you. And so you have to, I think above all, you have to find the journalists that you trust, not just the outlets, not just because the ABC can be just as crappy as any commercial, It's about the individual journalists.
Yeah.
I think that's very important.
Here at The Property Mentors, we have decades of experience investing in property. We know what to look for and what kind of impact it can have on your portfolio. We have access to brokers, accountants, and property managers to make sure your portfolio performs. Visit thepropertymentors.com.au to learn more.
What do news organisations go through in order to choose topics that are going to get the most coverage? Because there's obviously specific events such as COVID and protests that will dominate the news cycle, but they're a bit more transient. Whereas topics like property, for example, has been for decades a staple topic of news outlets. So what is it about something like property that makes it so popular?
News isn't news unless it's new. unless it's happening, either just happened, is happening, or is about to happen. Something like property is changing every day, like property prices fluctuating every day. And so that's what makes it so newsworthy. So it's day-to-day reporting. It's bread and butter reporting, really, property reporting. The other thing about property is it's highly relevant to the audience. There's no point on reporting something that doesn't impact the audience in any way. So, for example, if a cat got stuck up a tree in a street in New York, it might make, and the fire brigade came and got the cat down, it might make a little community newspaper for that area of New York, right? Yeah. But it's not going to make The Age or the Herald Sun or the ABC because it doesn't affect me. But property prices affect everybody, whether you're renting, whether you're buying, if you've got an investment, it affects everybody. So it's a solid news story, I guess is what I'm saying. It's what we'd call solid. It's bread and butter journalism, really.
Yeah, because even though it's the same sort of topic, and regardless of your situation, as you said, whether you're renting or if you're investing, it is those every day or every week or every month changes that just keep the media going. We'll talk about that.
I mean, property prices. I mean, and I watch a lot of news. But it doesn't matter if you're on ABC or you're on a commercial or you're reading a paper or you're on a website or you're listening to the radio. Doesn't matter. Property is on every single night on the news.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because there's so much interest in it.
Yeah. Yeah. As you said, it's highly relevant. So why wouldn't they? Yeah. And sort of almost all Australian industries and the economy at large have historically kind of followed this sort of boom and bust cycle. And in fact, actually, we recently published an episode on the boom, correction and recovery cycle that the property market follows. And as a part of these cycles, we see a lot of, as I said before, that media hype. And many outlets they'll report the sort of golden age of property or the sky is falling, depending on where we are in that cycle. But given we do fairly comfortably know this is a common cycle, what do some of the media or the news outlets report these events? Why do they with that air of like alarmism or once in a lifetime-ness?
Well, I guess they've got to highlight with every story. They've got to highlight its relevance, because if you don't highlight its relevance, it's no longer a news story. And a way of highlighting that relevance is that kind of, this is a once in a lifetime rate rise or whatever. And I guess for them, because most journalists these days are kind of, half my age, it is a once in a lifetime thing. They're 25. They've never seen it before. Or if they have seen it, they took no notice of it. So because they were 18 and running around to pubs and things. But it is a once in a lifetime thing for them.
Yeah.
And it's not that they're deliberately sensationalizing. I think that that's actually how they interpret it.
Okay.
That it is a once in a lifetime thing. And as you've just said, rates go up and down as the years go by. Yeah. Rates are going up. They'll probably go up more. Yeah, probably. I mean, don't listen to me. I'm not a finance journalist, but that they come down as well.
Yeah.
This is not a forever thing, and this is a normal thing. But journalists have to report change. They have to report what is new. And at the moment, rates going up is new. And when rates start going down, that'll be new too.
Yeah. It's always interesting, something I've kind of taken away from this is that, I love that differentiation between media and journalism, because journalists have a job to do at the end of the day. And, they've got to eat, so they've got to make money. And it's not necessarily always their problem if they're putting out stories that might be not as reliable, because, again, they've still got to bring that a focus to their story and their work.
Well, even the ABC, I mean, has to rate something.
Yeah.
I mean, although it doesn't, I don't care about ratings. Of course it cares about ratings, because if it's not rating, the program's going to get taken off.
Yeah.
So, it is about ratings, it is about clicks, it is about likes, it is about shares. But for journalism, it's about something more as well. And and believe it or not, we do have a code of ethics.
Yeah.
We have a very strict code of ethics, and we take it very, very seriously.
Okay.
And I won't go through all the ethics now, but the basic principles are fairness, balance, accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of what we live by. Whereas other elements of the news media and other elements of the media, and even people who are behaving as journalists but are not journalists, like bloggers, for example, although some bloggers are journalists.
Sure, yeah.
Half the time they're not even aware that a code of ethics exists.
Right, okay, that's a good point to make, yeah.
Whereas journalists, professional journalists, take it very, very seriously. Because journalism cannot exist. It will cease to exist the moment it no longer has that social license to do what it does.
Yeah.
The only reason why we exist is because people want news. And as soon as people go, I'm not listening to journalism anymore, we cease, we stop.
Yeah. Going off bloggers, I think I read something the other day, and I can't remember the exact stat, but it was something like 12% of Gen Z get their news from things like TikTok. And I mean, I'm not going to lie. Sometimes I find out about news events or something through, satirical pages like the Batuta Advocate and the Shovel and all that. But that's them just sort of introducing it to me, and then I go and find the actual.
Absolutely.
But yeah, it is kind of scary knowing that things like TikTok, which is just taken over the world, is something that people are using as like reliable sources.
But you want to know something? Journalists are now disseminating news through TikTok. I mean, it hasn't caught on as a big thing yet, but I do know journalists who do disseminate news on TikTok.
Wow. Yeah, that's not surprising.
My boss actually said to me, because I use Twitter a fair bit with my students, teaching them how to live report using Twitter. And my boss said to me the other day, now, have you thought about moving to TikTok? And I said, yeah, what? Tick what? Because I'm old. But it's becoming a new thing among the younger journalists. I mean, they do the other traditional outlets as well, but it's TikTok too.
Yeah.
TikTok too.
Yeah, I think, again, it's one of those things where it's sometimes it can be good because it can be introducing them to certain events. Like that might just be how they find out about it. But again, there are so many self-proclaimed, all kinds of professions on there, like therapists and doctors, and it's like, and journalists. And I think, as you said before, it's just really important that you take your time and do that little bit more digging to make sure it is reliable, and you're not just grabbing onto the first thing that you hear.
Absolutely. And try and follow like things that are happening within the journalism industry. So, for example, I know that Nick McKenzie has won more gold Walkleys than any other journalist. Now, a gold Walkley is it's like a Pulitzer Prize, but for Australian journalists.
Okay.
So, follow things like who's winning the Walkleys. That's because that's, a group of highly experienced senior journalists looking at the story, the importance of the story, and the ethics of the story, and how fair, balanced, and accurate it is.
Okay.
And if you're continuously winning Walkleys like that, you're a pretty damn good journalist.
Yeah, that speaks volumes.
So if you kind of keep up with who are the credible journalists, then you can start to follow the credible journalists.
Yeah. Josie, is there anything else you want to add today that you think would kind of be valuable for the listeners to know about this?
As I said, journalism is not the media. It has a different function. Journalism's not even the news media. It has a different function. And every journalist, serious professional qualified journalist that I've ever met has only ever had their public at heart.
Okay, yeah.
They truly care. They care. They take very seriously their role in the functioning of democracy, and they care. They give a shit. They give a shit about their readers and their viewers, and they're not all high flying, I don't know if you remember that show called Frontline in the 90s, which was about commercial current affairs. Journalists aren't that. They're just not that. And if they are that, then they're not journalists.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I think that's really important for people to know. This has been so fascinating, to not only learn about the sort of property market sense, but just the wider scope of how the media works, because we're all consuming it in some way or another, whether it's reliable or not. But I know so many of our listeners are going to find this helpful, and I know it's going to encourage them to be even more mindful and even that little bit more critical of what they're consuming, no matter what the topic is. But thank you so much. You've been so generous with your time today.
Absolutely, my pleasure. I could talk about journalism till I'm blue in the face.
Well, I might have to get you back on then, because journalism's not going anywhere. Oh, I love that.
It's my passion.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure, Phoebe. Thank you.
If you found this episode or any of our episodes helpful, please make sure to share and leave a rating to help us reach more people on their investing journeys. And of course, subscribe to be notified when new episodes drop. Make sure to follow the podcast on Instagram @Investor Intelligence Podcast. You can find links to our other socials in the show notes, including a link to the Property Mentors weekly blog. If you're ready to get your property portfolio in shape for financial freedom, check out Luke's latest book, Property Fit. You can get yourself a copy at www.propertyfitbook.com.au.